My name is Marnie Hebert. I work over in the mental health clinic, and I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about suicide prevention, some of the things to look for, and then some of the resources that we have available. So, I just want to start by talking about the national prevalence. Unfortunately, this is something that happens more often than we would like it to. It's the second leading cause of death for Americans ages 10 to 34. Here's some other statistics. 10th leading cause of death in the U.S. for all Americans. We don't have the statistics on military deaths, but I want to say it's something like the more military members die by suicide than in combat-related injuries or death on the battlefield or what have you. And then men are 3.53 times more likely to die from suicide. Do you know why? Does anyone have any ideas why it's why men are more likely to die from suicide attempts than women?
Because they pick more lethal methods,
Mm-hmm.
so like they're shooting themselves, or
Yes.
hanging themselves,
Yeah.
or like overdosing, where there's a chance that somebody will find them.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Men typically tend to choose more violent means to end their lives. But yeah, you're exactly right. So just some facts in Colorado. Looking over this, are there any statistics that surprise anyone? One for me, the one that jumped out the most for me was that it's the number one leading cause of death for 10 to 14-year-olds. Isn't that just sad? It's so surprising. And, you guys are in a position to really be kind of on the forefront with spouses and families, and just keep this in your mind as you're working with families who have kids this age. This is a huge thing that they're facing. And, one of the local school districts here had one of the highest suicide rates in the nation here in the past couple of years. So keep that in mind as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about suicide contagion. This is just the idea that the exposure can sometimes increase the likelihood that others will have suicidal ideation or attempt suicide. You might hear about, local clusters of suicide where, one high school student will end their life by suicide, and then they have a bunch more that follow. So this is a known phenomenon. We'll talk a little bit about that. So it can be direct or indirect exposure. Direct exposure might be, someone in their school versus hearing about it on TV. Or when I say suicide contagion, is there any example that immediately comes to mind?
Yeah, so Kate Spade,
Yeah.
guess, and then there was like an article of like, is this going to spark like a suicide contagion?
Yep.
That's actually the first time I heard of it, was in the article that I read yesterday.
Yeah. And especially like celebrity suicides. That's a huge one, where it will be on the news where maybe there's nothing else to talk about, or they're like, Robin Williams was a big one, Kate Spade, where they want to then go and talk about everything about them and all of that. 13 Reasons Why was a huge one. When that came out, I know a lot of people in the mental health community were like, how did this happen? How did this get approved? Because I watched it as an adult, and it was upsetting. It was really upsetting. But then I watch it with the understanding of the development of a teenager's brain, and that's scary because they haven't developed the ability to think complexly. They're not object permanence, because that's like infantile development, but the idea that death is permanent. You make this decision based on what you're going through now and emotions, and it is not something you get. You don't get another life. Yeah. It's not a video game. You don't get to try again.
Do you think it's good to watch with your children? Like, is it talking?
A lot of the things I've seen that have come out about it are if your kids are going to watch it anyway, then you need to have a conversation about it. And you're not with your kids all the time. You know, they might be at a friend's house and it's on. It might not be something that they're seeking out, but, you know, they're hanging out and these kids are like, hey, let's watch this. I know there's one episode that it'll tell you, like, this is the episode, this is the time where it shows this girl ending her life. And it shows it. And so, you know, there might be a group of people that say, you know, let's watch this. You know, we know exactly where it is and what time it's at. But the chances are your kids are going to be exposed to things like this. So it is important to have a conversation. And I know Netflix faced a lot of backlash, and so they started each episode with the National Suicide Hotline, and like this program talks about sensitive things. It can be triggering. So they kind of responded that way. But I guess it did well enough that they made a second season. So while everyone was up in arms saying, hey, this was a really bad idea, it was also, you know, lucrative for them. But yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. Anytime there's something that your kids are going to be exposed to, you can't keep them in the basement their whole lives. So have a conversation about it. You know, it is a good kind of opener for some heavy stuff that they're going to face. So the Air Force actually has guidelines about, you know, if someone dies by suicide, these are the things that we do. These are the things that we're allowed to say. This is how we react to it to kind of minimize this contagion. So I just want you guys to keep this in mind if you are running any sorts of like Facebook groups or whatever kind of groups you might run in your roles or in your personal life. Just keep this in mind. And if you're like an admin of a group, pay attention to how the conversation is going, and just keep in mind that if people are talking in certain ways and maybe glorifying it or seem overly upset to the point that you're like, oh, there's something there, you know, you can kind of respond to that. But be aware that this is a very real thing. More so than, you guys have probably heard the myth that if you ask someone if they're thinking about hurting themselves, then they're going to do it. See, that's a myth. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, versus like hearing about it. And because a lot of the time it kind of glorifies the action, whether negative or positive. And then you think about people who might be you know, emotionally in a bad place or immature because they're literally kids, and they see I think the concerning thing with the 13 Reasons Why was just glorifying someone after they've passed away, giving kids this unnatural idea that they can alter someone else's life after they've passed, or using it as a means to get revenge on someone. So those are kind of the dangerous ideas, you know, and also things that can happen with the suicide contagion. So we're going to talk about risk factors. These are the things that research has shown make people more likely to attempt or complete suicide. Prior suicide attempts is the number one risk factor. If someone has attempted in the past, it might be just riskier and riskier behavior, or like, well, I tried it in the past and it didn't do anything, so more and more lethal means. Family history of suicide, there can be either you know, genetic component maybe towards depression, but also just the exposure that someone else has done it and saw that was a means to end their life. Violence or hostility, family violence, chronic physical pain. I think there's another, what did I do? Oh, there we go. Loss of health. It can be even a perceived loss of health, even if it's not, you know, someone looking in is like, oh, you're still able to do a lot. It's that person's perception of their own life. Loss of marriage or relationship. This is a big one that I wanted to talk about, especially being a military community. Just before and during disciplinary proceedings. A lot of times when a military member is going to be disciplined and they're being informed that either they're under investigation or they're going to get an Article 15 or some sort of something like that, they'll have like a chaplain present because it's really common. Imagine you're just getting this information that is potentially career ending and it has implications for your family and your whole life. It's really common for people to feel hopeless. I shouldn't say it's really common, but the potential is there for people to feel hopeless and maybe make some rash decisions. So just be aware of that. If there's a family that you know of that might be going through that, they're at a higher risk. So to keep an eye on that. Family history of mental health or substance abuse and lack of adequate coping skills. Now, what we're going to talk about now is protective factors, because we can look through this list and all of us have something on there, maybe multiple, but what we also need to talk about are protective factors, and this is resiliency. And this is not to say that, if someone attempts suicide or has mental illness that they're weak or whatever. The human experience is really complex. And we can't say who is going to be resilient and who is not. But these are some things that have been proven to be protective against, suicidal behavior, suicidal ideation. Cultural and religious or spiritual beliefs that discourage suicide, if they practice good health and they have access to health care. A lot of people don't have an option, to seek mental health care, or their options are so limited that they don't know what they are. Fortunately, we're not in that boat. We have so many options as TRICARE beneficiaries. We have a ton of options available, so no one should feel like they don't have options. Knowledge of where to find those options is another thing, and that's something that we can provide to people. Hope for the future. Strong sense of self-worth, positive social skills, strong social support. This is a huge thing. We move a lot as military families. In fact, I just found out we're moving last week. Totally unexpected. But one of the hardest things to do is move to a new place, because you have to make all those new friends again. If your spouse's unit is difficult, then you've already moved in and you're starting out in a stressful place. And if you don't have someone who's like, hey, new person, I got your back, let's be friends, let me kind of show you the ropes, it can start you off on a really bad foot. And that's a huge thing in suicide prevention, is making sure people have, groups to belong to and feel included. I think that's on the next page. This is one that I really wanted to hit hard, this is especially relevant to you in your positions. Opportunities to participate in and contribute to school and or community projects. That's a huge thing. If someone is feeling totally out of sorts and lost, it's so easy to be like, hey, we actually need someone to help with this. And then already they're plugged into the community. And it's not just, hey, show up and have fun. It's, hey, show up because we need you. We gave you an assignment, we need you to participate. Restricted access to lethal means. One of the things that we don't really think about, and I actually just learned this at a suicide training with the VA, is that someone who is actively suicidal, that is a temporary state, and while the research shows that we're not super good at predicting suicide, we can lessen the chances by removing the means, getting that person stabilized, and treating whatever issues are going on. So if you're talking to someone who is actively suicidal, that's temporary, and you can lessen the chances that they will actually attempt or complete suicide by following those steps. So that's something positive to keep in mind. So then warning signs. One of the big ones, and this always comes out of FTAC, when I say, hey, what are the warning signs of suicidality? And people will always say, oh, they're giving away their belongings. That actually isn't really one, but I know.
That people would say that.
Yeah, it's been passed around for so long that I think everyone just continued, and then finally someone was like, no, actually that's not really that predictive. I mean, maybe if someone was like giving up like a pet or something that would need like long-term care or something, you might be like, oh, that's really concerning. But otherwise, appearing sad or depressed, and most of the time, loss of interest, trouble sleeping and eating. This is another key one to hit. If you know someone whose baseline mood is kind of depressed and somber, and then all of a sudden they're really calm and happy, that might mean that they've resolved to hurt themselves and they're at peace with it. And that is a huge warning sign. Neglecting personal welfare. If you see a change in someone's hygiene or a decline in their hygiene or whatever, or just a general change in what is normal for them. Like if someone is just your average person and then all of a sudden they're becoming super withdrawn and they don't want to talk to anyone, that's a huge warning sign. But then also if you have someone who is all of a sudden engaging in really risky behavior, like they're maybe engaging in unprotected sex or having a lot of partners, or they're doing really risky, like high adrenaline things, that's cause for concern, to be like, what's going on? You know, this is not normal for you. And then we talked about withdrawing from friends and society. So now we're going to talk about what you can do, like the active parts. Because if you haven't already, especially being part of the military community, your chances are pretty good you're going to come across someone who has had some suicidal ideation or who might be thinking about hurting themselves. I know I've been married to my husband for 7 years, and apart from my job in mental health, I've already had suicide affect our lives in, I think, 2 or 3 circumstances, just in 7 years. So it's unfortunately pretty prevalent, especially in the military. So you want to be yourself, be authentic. If you are like, I don't know what to do, but I really want to help you, say, I don't know what to do, but I really want to help you. That is the best thing you can do. And just listen. This is not the time to give advice or be like, oh, you know, when my sister was suicidal, we did this, blah, blah, blah. What you're doing is you're kind of buying time and kind of saying, okay, what's really going on in this situation? How is this, like, do I need to be like picking up my phone and calling the police right now? Like, can I find, you know, a phone number? Is this person going to let me take them somewhere? Just listen, let them vent, and be sympathetic, non-judgmental, and calming. It can be really alarming if this comes up and someone is like, yeah, I was thinking about killing myself last night. Like, that can be like, what am I supposed to do with this? But keep in mind, that is a good thing. If they're telling you this, you're already on the right track. That is a very positive sign. What is concerning is, you know, you hear about people who have committed suicide and you're like, what? How? No one knew. We had no idea anything was going on. You know, if someone is super resolved and they're just going to tell you whatever you need to get out and leave them alone, that's concerning. So if someone is honest and says, yeah, I was thinking that, you know, maybe my family would be better off without me, that's a good sign that they're opening up. And then that gives you the opportunity to connect them with whatever resources they need. So I want to go back. So it sounded like you guys hadn't heard of that myth of like, well, you don't ask someone, because then if you do, then they'll be like, oh, wait, that's an option? See, that sounds so ridiculous. Like, you're not going to plant that idea in anyone's head. And you can be as direct as asking them, like, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Like, have you thought that, you know, maybe you'd be better off dead? And that it can be as simple as that. And I know that it can sometimes be awkward, but it's so much easier than just beating around the bush, you know, because you need to know. You need to know what they're thinking about. So if you suspect someone might be thinking about hurting themselves, or even if they're at risk, don't argue with them. and you know, like it might seem helpful, but it's not helpful to say things like, oh no, you'd never do that. You're just doing that for attention, because that's not for you to say. And sometimes there are super dramatic people. Sometimes there are people who hurt themselves for attention, but that is not the time to be like, oh, you're just doing this for attention, or I don't, because sometimes people who are doing it for attention have accidents that they can't come back from. Or there are people who say, oh, I'm supposed to have an appointment at 1 o'clock. I know if I don't go at 1 o'clock, someone will be at my house by 2. What if something happens and they don't show up? You can't be like, oh, this is just a cry for help. It's not. You're not equipped to make that decision. Let someone else make that decision. Because if you take them to the hospital and, a licensed trained provider says they're not at risk, that's cool. That's what you want. Not, oh, I thought they were just, doing this for attention, and it wasn't. So yeah, just I think the biggest thing is to just be honest. And if you don't know what to do, if you don't know how to react, you can be honest about that and just be like, I'm here for you. I'm not quite sure, how to respond to this, but I'm here for you, and I'll listen, and we'll get you help. And then show respect. Don't be judgmental. And part of them, it can be a really confusing place to be. And when you're in that place, a lot of the time you forget about all of the things you have to live for and all of the people you have, and so don't be judgmental. It's a very scary place to be, and if you've never been there, just be empathetic and realize that you can help them get further help. So these are also important things to remember. Don't ever promise that you won't tell. If someone is like, I want to tell you something, but you have to promise that you're not going to tell anyone. You can't. you can't walk away from that. I'm a mandated reporter. Your spouses, they're all mandated reporters. They can't. It's not legal for them to promise they're not going to tell anyone. But just ethically and morally, you can't keep that a secret. And you can explain their concern. This happens a lot. Even just in our office, people will be like, no, I'm not going to hurt myself, but I don't have time. Or I'm thinking I might be better off dead. I had a plan and blah, 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 but I'm not going to the hospital. I need to go back to work. Well, I'm sorry, but what you said is really concerning. I can't let you leave. And that's fine to say to someone. I can't in good conscience let you walk away after what you just told me, And then getting them to help. Don't worry about fixing their problems or offering advice. If someone is suicidal, they're beyond advice. They're beyond, friendly. Well, this is what I did when I went through it. They need professional help. And then don't blame yourself. Like I said, the human existence is so complex. And if someone is depressed, suicidal, if they've gotten to that point, it is beyond, a compassionate friend being able to fix. So don't put that on yourself. That's not fair. That's not fair for you. And that this is a huge point. The person most responsible for monitoring distress and intervening is the individual. It is not your responsibility to be with them 24/7 and make sure that they're making responsible decisions and keeping themselves safe. There's only so much you can do. Oh man, I keep doing this. What am I doing, Ruth? There we go. Do I just have to wait? Okay. Okay. All right. So this is the model that the military uses. They even use this in the Army as well. So if you panic and you're like, crap, this is so uncomfortable, I don't know what to do, this is the model the military uses. Ask the person, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Have you been thinking that your family would be better off without you? Have you thought of how you're going to hurt yourself? Care for the person. Remove the means for self-injury if they're like, yeah, I have this bottle of pills. Hey, is it okay if for right now I just take that while we're talking? Or, do you have any weapons in your house? Oh, well, I was planning on shooting myself tonight. Well, let's lock that gun up. And can I have the key while we figure this out? If at any point you feel unsafe, if the person has become, irrational or threatening towards you, the most important thing is that you remove yourself from the situation and call the police. Don't try to, you're not a negotiator. Take care of yourself first, and then get them help. But the reality is the vast majority of people who are suicidal are not dangerous to anyone else besides themselves. And remain calm. How many of you are parents? So you're pros at being like, I have no idea what's going on, but I'm going to pretend like I do because I'm going to freak you all out. So you know the face that you use. Just remain calm. Even if internally you're like panicking, just remain calm and listen to them. Listening to them is a really good way to buy time while you're like, okay, I can do this, while you're calming yourself down internally. Because it even catches me off guard, and this is my job, when people tell me that, they're thinking of hurting themselves, I'm like, oh, crap, that's not good. And then escort the person. Don't leave them alone. If you need to make a phone call for someone to come, if it's a service member, if it's your spouse or a close friend or service member or whoever, they have a first sergeant who this is their job, and they're great here. I work with them. The first sergeants here are really awesome. So if you need to make a phone call to get someone there, you can do that. Or you can ask them, hey, would you come with me to mental health? Would you come with me to, Peakview? They have walk-in hours. Can we go over to Cedar Springs and just talk to someone? Can we go to Evans? So you can always take them there. If you're on the phone with someone and they are, talking about hurting themselves, and you find out where they're at and they hang up on you, you always have the option to call the police and have them do a welfare check. Or if you know someone's at home and you're concerned about them, you can always have the police do a welfare check on them. Or if it's a service member, chain of command as well, their first sergeant.
You shouldn't go to their house by yourself.
Yeah. Just make sure that you have someone that's equipped to be able to deal with, the situation. So I want to do a little exercise, because everyone has their own situation, and everyone will react differently, when you're talking to someone. So I just want to go over some situations and see what types of responses you would have. Say you're talking to a friend or you're talking to a new spouse. So if you said, are you thinking about hurting yourself? And someone said, yeah, I have, but I would never hurt myself. What would your reaction be?
Like, what makes you so sure?
Okay.
Like, so you feel like you really resolved that,
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean? Like, and you feel confident that, like, you had these thoughts, but
Mhm.
now, like, you feel like you resolved that, you understand what you're going through, you found help in some
Mhm.
way. Like, what brought you to, like, oh, but I would never do that?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, you must have really resolved that then. Like, that's so great. Like,
Yeah.
what did you do? Did you talk to someone about it? Or, like,
Mm-hmm.
kind of figuring out, like, what made you get to that through?
Mhm.
Like, oh, I would never do that.
Yeah.
That's so great. You resolved that. Like, how did you come to that resolution?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that is a really good point, because if someone has had suicidal ideation in the past, that's, people don't just go out and kill themselves. There's a path that gets them there. And if the ideation has already been there, then maybe it's maybe they're like underlying, like their baseline is kind of depressed, and then they have all these things happen in their life. Well, yeah, the moment they're talking to you, sure, no, I would never hurt myself. But what if they come home and their spouse says, hey, I got orders and I don't want you to go with me? Wow, that is not what they were planning on, you know.
Yeah.
And then still offering them resources, because the fact that they've even thought about it is concerning. Because, you know, I'm sure there have been spouses that have come home and said, hey, I have orders and I don't want you to go with me. And their reaction is not, well, what's the point of living? You know, that you kind of see my point there. So I would still offer resources at this point. Like, well, have you thought about talking to someone? Would you talk to someone? You know, this might not be an instance where you would escort someone, but making sure that they have access to the resources that are available. How would you respond to that? Are you thinking about hurting yourself? Oh, I'd never do that.
I feel like that's better than somebody saying like I have, but I definitely won't. Because like that's really concerning. They're like, oh no, I would never do that. Like maybe they are
That could
just
also
upset.
be a cover-up of them just not wanting
Yeah.
to admit it
Yeah.
and trying to get you to go
I would
away.
just say,
Yeah.
are you sure that you would never do that? I'm concerned about you and I'm seeing some signs.
That is the huge thing.
Yeah.
I'm stating your concerns to be like, okay, you say that, but this is why I'm worried. This is why I even asked you in the first place. Because I think our biggest fear is, you know, we don't want to make idiots out of ourselves, and to say like, are you thinking about killing yourself? And someone's like, come on, like, no way. Well, guess what? That opens a conversation to be like,
Yeah.
well, do you want to know why I asked you? Because you're acting like this and you're doing this and this is what worries me. And then guess what? Conversation from there. So I think that's a huge point. You're right. And I think it takes fleshing out to see like, oh, is this person being trustworthy right now, or are they trying to cover it up? And then saying, well, these are my concerns. This is why I even brought it up in the first place. And then you can kind of go from there. This time tomorrow, nothing will matter, and I'll be dead.
That's like you're escorting someone.
Yeah. Yeah,
Do you
absolutely.
have a plan? What is your plan? Let's talk about this. Let's go get you some help.
But what if someone says something to you that you're not prepared to hear? Like, I guess my point is, only ask a question if you're comfortable dealing with the response. You know what I mean? Like if you feel comfortable with the information they give you, then go ahead and ask that. But if they're like, well, I have a gun next to me, and you're like, oh gosh, what do I, you know? If they say this time tomorrow, nothing will matter and I'll be dead, and that sends you into a panic, it is fine to be like, all right, I have nothing more valuable to add to this conversation. Let's get you someplace else. That's okay too. That's kind of my point. Is just, you know, we see counseling on TV all the time, and so I think we're prepared with what should be the next question, but don't necessarily feel like you need to ask it if you're not equipped to deal with the response they give you, basically. Pain will stop. My family will be better off. Yeah, I'm gonna kill myself.
Then that's when you tell them like that's a temporary feeling, let's get you some help. Like you were saying, it's like you're in a temporary state. Like that's how you feel now. Let's get you somewhere so you can be in a better place where you don't feel like that. Because that's a temporary feeling.
Yeah.
You feel like you're just overwhelmed right now.
There
And-
are other ways to stop the pain,
Yeah.
and let's figure out those ways
Yeah, exactly.
together.
Yeah, exactly. Just let it, this is where active listening is huge. Just letting them vent, letting them talk while you're in your mind going over the steps of like, okay, this is my plan. This is, you know, the next step that I'm going to take. This is what I'm going to call. This is what I'm going to do. And don't be afraid, like, the vast majority of people who have some sort of intervention with their plan afterwards, they're like, oh my gosh, yeah, I was just in a bad place. It's scary where I was. And some people will be like, screw you. I can't believe you stopped that, you know. Well, I can live with that. I can live with someone being mad at me for, you know, intervening in their plan. But you know, obviously trying to get someone voluntarily to go someplace as long as you can, and unless they're absolutely not, and then, you know, just making sure they're safe, whatever, getting them to the appropriate resource, you know, or getting the appropriate resource to them. I do feel like I'd hurt myself, but I don't know where to go.
I can help you with that. I can, here's some resources, let's call some people, or, you know, if you're physically there, let's go
Yeah.
talk to the MFLAC or the chaplain. Or
Yeah, absolutely. A good majority of people who come in to see us are brought in with someone. Either someone said, hey, I've been here and I know where it is and it's really helpful, or I haven't been, but I know, let's go try it, or hey, I want to go over to mental health, but I'm kind of uncomfortable about it. Will you go with me? You know, that happens a lot. So that's awesome. Okay, so if you suspect someone's at risk for suicide, if you feel like, because there are some circumstances where you're like, whoa, this is totally beyond me.
Yeah.
I got nothing. This is where we have, you know, helping professionals, and you know, just be aware of how you are feeling and what's going on for you, and then make sure that you're able to give them references and resources and referrals, and then you know, if you truly feel like it's an emergency, you can call 911. Like if you head over to someone's house and you're like, oh, are you thinking about hurting yourself? And they're like, well, I downed a bottle of medicine, so yeah, you just call 911. You just call the ambulance in that situation. That one's fairly simple. But so these are some of the resources that we have locally. Hopefully you guys are pretty familiar with most of these. The EAP that's like the resource for people like me and like Ruth. That's our employment. God, what do we call that, Ruth? The employee assistance program. So that's kind of that's like our equivalent to like the Airman Family Readiness, I guess.
Yeah.
But and then there's Schriever Mental Health, Peterson Mental Health. Are you guys all familiar with Military OneSource? Yeah. Well, I'll just give you a brief overview. If you're not, it's mental health providers in the community who are approved by Military OneSource to see active duty members, their family members. So what you do is you just call the number. You'll get triaged by a professional who will kind of put your situation down, reach out to community counselors, and then they'll get in touch with you. You can see them at no cost to you for up to 12 sessions per issue. So if you see a counselor you like and you're working on depression and you feel like that's resolved, and you're like, oh, well, guess what? I have really bad anxiety when I go out in public. You can continue for another 12 sessions for that. And then obviously chaplains, and then whatever, if someone has a local religion that they belong to, there's generally, you know, resources available through them. And then obviously TRICARE will pay for individual and family counseling. And then Ruth has the resources for couples counseling. So I think that's it. Oh, gotta wait a minute. I believe the next page is just the end. So do you guys have any questions or concerns? It's just a summary.
This has been the best suicide awareness briefing that I've seen.
Oh, wow, thank you.
It's really good.
Good. Well, I mean, unfortunately, like I said, it's something that you'll probably encounter, whether it's, you know, someone you know personally or through a friend or through the families that you work with. So it's important to kind of be aware of it, and yeah. If I could give you the biggest thing, if you remember nothing else, it's just be authentic. And if you're unsure, it's okay to be like, I'm not really sure what to do, but we're gonna figure it out. You know, You don't need to pretend like you have all the answers. That's fine. So, any other questions? All right. Well, thank you guys for your time.